Bowling Green, the oldest park in New York City, was created in 1733. It stood at the southern tip of Manhattan, a small oval of land that carried enormous meaning. This ground became a stage for colonial ambition, revolutionary anger, and civic pride. Its history is not only about grass and fences, it is about power, protest, and the choices that shaped America. In the early 18th century, New York was still under British rule. The city was growing, and officials wanted to bring order to its public spaces. On March 12, 1733, the Common Council leased the land at the foot of Broadway to three wealthy residents, Peter J., John Roosevelt, and Peter Bayard. They agreed to pay a symbolic rent of 1 peppercorn per year. The council ordered that the land be fenced and maintained as a park. The name Bowling Green was chosen because lawn bowling was a fashionable pastime among New York's colonial elite in the early 18th century. The game, imported from Europe, required a smooth, grassy surface, and the small oval at the foot of Broadway provided the perfect setting. In 1733, the Common Council leased the land to three wealthy merchants, Peter J., John Roosevelt, and Peter Bayard, for the symbolic rent of 1 peppercorn per year. The lease required them to maintain the grounds for the use and recreation of the inhabitants of the city, but in practice, the park was designed to serve the wealthy class. The park quickly became a symbol of refinement in a bustling colonial city. Surrounded by elegant homes and close to the governor's residence, Bowling Green reflected the aspirations of New York's elite to create a space that mirrored European sophistication. The enclosure of the park with an iron fence in 1771 reinforced this exclusivity. The fence, imported from England, was adorned with decorative crowns and emblems of monarchy, signaling loyalty to King George III. Yet from the beginning, Bowling Green carried controversy. Ordinary citizens complained that the park was reserved for the rich while they were excluded from its use. The iron fence was not merely decorative, it was a barrier that kept out those who could not claim social standing. This exclusion reflected the broader divisions of colonial society, where wealth and privilege determined access to public life. The controversy deepened when the city spent public funds on the fence and its embellishments. Many argued that the money could have been better used for common needs, such as street repairs or sanitation. Instead, it was spent to beautify a park that ordinary citizens could not freely enjoy. This tension between public resources and private privilege made Bowling Green a symbol of inequality as well as refinement. By the 1770s, the park's exclusivity became a political issue. The crowns on the fence and the statue of King George III erected nearby turned Bowling Green into a visible reminder of monarchy and privilege. For loyalists, it was a proud symbol of their ties to Britain. For patriots, it was a provocation. The very fence that had excluded ordinary citizens became a target of anger, and in 1776, its crowns were sawed off in defiance of royal authority. Thus, while Bowling Green began as a reflected both refinement and exclusion, both civic pride and social division, the iron fence, still standing today, carries the scars of that tension, reminding us that public spaces are never neutral. They are shaped by power, privilege, and protest. The three men who first leased Bowling Green in 1733 were not ordinary citizens. They were members of New York's colonial elite, men whose wealth and influence shaped the city's future. Peter J. was a wealthy merchant engaged in trade across the Atlantic. His family would later produce John J., one of the most important figures in American history. John J. became a founding father, the first Chief Justice of the United States, and a key negotiator of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. The J family's connection to Bowling Green shows how the park's origins were tied to families who would later play central roles in the nation's story. John Roosevelt was part of the Roosevelt family, already prominent in colonial New York. The Roosevelts were merchants and landowners, deeply involved in the city's economy. Centuries later, the family would produce two presidents, Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin D. Roosevelt, but in the 18th century, their influence was already visible. Holding the lease to Bowling Green reflected their position among the city's most powerful families. Peter Bayard completed the trio. The Bayard family was another wealthy merchant dynasty, descended from Nicholas Bayard, who had served as mayor of New York in the late 17th century. The Bayards were connected to the city's political and economic elite, and their involvement in Bowling Green showed how the park was shaped by families with deep roots in colonial society. In 1770, the British colonial government commissioned a statue of King George III to stand in Bowling Green. The statue was crafted in London, shipped across the Atlantic, and erected on a marble pedestal at the southern tip of Broadway. It was made of lead and covered with gold leaf, designed to gleam in the sunlight and remind New Yorkers of their loyalty to the crown. The statue was not simply decoration, it was a political statement. It stood as a visible symbol of royal authority in the heart of the colony. Surrounding the park was the iron fence installed in 1771, adorned with decorative crowns and emblems of monarchy. The fence itself was imported from England, its design reinforcing the image of royal power. For Loyalists, the statue and fence were proud reminders of their connection to Britain. They saw Bowling Green as a place of order, refinement, and loyalty. For Patriots, however, the statue was a provocation. Each time they passed the gilded figure of the king, they were reminded of the authority they sought to resist. The turning point came on July 9, 1776. Earlier that day, the Declaration of Independence had been read aloud to the Continental Army and to citizens gathered at City Hall. The words carried power. They declared that the colonies were free, that monarchy had no authority over them. Fired with anger and determination, a crowd marched down Broadway to Bowling Green. There, in a burst of defiance, they pulled ropes around the statue of King George III and dragged it down. The lead figure crashed to the ground, its gilded surface shattered. The crowd hacked at the statue, breaking it into pieces. The fragments were carted off to Litchfield, Connecticut, where they were melted into bullets. Records from the time note that nearly 42,000 bullets were produced from the statue's lead, later fired against British troops. The iron fence was attacked as well. The decorative crowns that had symbolized monarchy were sawed off, leaving scars that remain visible today. The act was deliberate. It was not enough to topple the king's image. The symbols of monarchy themselves had to be erased. Bowling Green became a stage for revolution. What had once been a symbol of royal authority was transformed into a symbol of defiance. The destruction of the statue was both practical and symbolic. It provided ammunition for the war, but it also sent a message. The people of New York rejected monarchy, and they would fight for independence. For Loyalists, the event was shocking. They saw it as vandalism, a dangerous sign of rebellion. For Patriots, it was a triumph. The act at Bowling Green captured the spirit of the revolution, showing that ordinary citizens could reshape their world. The scars on the fence and the memory of the toppled statue became lasting reminders of that moment. When the revolution ended, Bowling Green stood scarred but alive. The statue of King George III was gone, its lead melted into bullets, and the crowns on its iron fence had been sawed off. Yet the small oval at the foot of Broadway remained. In the early Republic, Bowling Green became more than a reminder of rebellion. It became a civic space where the new nation tested its identity. After the Treaty of Paris in 1783, New York was no longer a colonial city. It was the capital of a new republic. For a brief period, from 1789 to 1790, New York served as the nation's capital, and Bowling Green stood at the center of civic life. The park, once reserved for colonial elites, now carried the weight of national pride. The early republic was marked by uncertainty. Would the new government survive? Could the city balance growth with memory? Bowling Green reflected these questions. It was both a public gathering place and a reminder of the revolution. Citizens walked past its scarred fence and remembered the day they had torn down a king. In the 1790s, Bowling Green became a site of civic gatherings, parades celebrating the new Constitution passed by its fence. Citizens gathered there to mark national holidays, including Independence Day. The park's location at the foot of Broadway made it a natural stage for public life. At the same time, Bowling Green carried memory. The scarred fence reminded citizens of their defiance against monarchy. The absence of the statue of King George III was itself a statement. The park was not rebuilt to honor kings, it was preserved as a reminder of rebellion. By the early 1800s, Bowling Green was also surrounded by new buildings. The customs house, banks, and offices rose nearby, reflecting the city's role as a financial center. The park became a green space amid commerce, a place where citizens could pause and reflect. The transformation of Bowling Green carried consequences. It became a symbol of civic pride, a place where citizens celebrated their new nation, yet it also carried tension. Some argued that the park should be expanded and beautified, while others insisted it should remain simple, scarred, and historical. The debate reflected larger questions about the republic. Should the nation honor its past by preserving scars, or should it move forward by creating new symbols? Bowling Green stood at the center of this debate. The mid-19th century was a time of rapid change for New York. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, had turned the city into the nation's commercial hub. Ships crowded the harbor, merchants filled the streets, and immigrants arrived in waves. Bowling Green, once a symbol of colonial privilege and revolutionary defiance, now stood at the edge of a city bursting with energy. The park's location made it central to these changes. It sat near the Battery, where immigrants first stepped onto American soil, and near the financial district, where commerce thrived. Bowling Green became a place where cultures met, where workers rested, and where officials debated the city's future. Philip Hone, who served as mayor of New York from 1826 to 1827, was one of the city's most vocal advocates for civic improvement. A wealthy auctioneer and diarist, Hone believed that public spaces reflected the character of the city. During his time in office and afterward, he supported projects to beautify New York's parks, including Bowling Green. Hone argued that well-kept public grounds gave dignity to the city and showed its growing importance in the young republic. His diaries often recorded his concern for order and refinement, and Bowling Green, with its colonial scars and central location, was a natural focus for his vision. At the same time, immigrant leaders, especially those from the Irish and German communities, saw Bowling Green in a different light. By the 1830s and 1840s, waves of immigrants were arriving in New York, many settling in Lower Manhattan. For them, Bowling Green was not simply a symbol of civic pride, it was a gathering place. Irish groups used the park for meetings and celebrations tied to their heritage, while German immigrants organized cultural events and political discussions there. In moments of unrest, such as protests against nativist hostility, Bowling Green became a stage for immigrant voices. Its location near the Battery, where newcomers first entered the city, gave it special meaning as a place of welcome and community. Surrounding Bowling Green were the offices of merchants and bankers, who viewed the park through yet another lens. For them, Bowling Green was a symbol of stability. Their businesses depended on order, and they wanted the park to reflect that. Merchants pushed for stricter rules to prevent gatherings that might disrupt commerce. Bankers supported beautification projects, not for leisure, but to project an image of prosperity and control. To them, Bowling Green was part of the financial district's identity, a green space that reassured clients and investors of the city's strength. By the 1840s, New York was undergoing one of the most dramatic transformations in its history. Immigration surged, reshaping the city's neighborhoods and its public spaces. Irish families, driven from their homeland by famine and poverty, arrived in large numbers, settling in Lower Manhattan. At the same time, German immigrants, many of them artisans and political refugees from Europe, sought opportunity in the growing metropolis. Together, these communities crowded into the narrow streets near the Battery and the financial district, and Bowling Green became one of the places where they gathered. The park's small oval of grass offered a rare open space in a city of crowded tenements and bustling docks. Immigrant families used it as a meeting ground, a place to rest after long days of labor, and at times a stage for protest. For many newcomers, Bowling Green was one of the first public spaces they encountered in America, and it carried symbolic meaning as a place where they could assert their presence in the city. But not all welcomed this change. In 1844, tensions between immigrants and nativist groups erupted near Bowling Green. Nativists, who opposed the growing influence of foreign-born populations, clashed with Irish and German communities in the streets surrounding the park. The confrontation reflected the city's struggle to absorb new populations while maintaining order. For officials, the violence raised urgent questions. Should Bowling Green remain open to all, or should access be restricted to prevent unrest? The debate revealed the deep divisions in New York society, where public spaces became battlegrounds for identity and belonging. At the same time, Bowling Green was being reshaped physically. City officials, influenced by the growing movement for civic improvement, introduced new plantings, pathways, and benches. They sought to beautify the park, making it a symbol of refinement in a rapidly expanding city. Yet these changes carried controversy. Some citizens argued that beautification erased the park's scars, removing reminders of its revolutionary past, the toppled statue of King George III and the crowns sawed off the iron fence. For them, the scars were part of the park's identity, a visible link to defiance and independence. Others insisted that progress demanded improvement, that the city's oldest park should reflect order and beauty rather than rebellion. The consequences of these changes were clear. Bowling Green became a divided space. For immigrants, it was a place of community and protest. For merchants, it was a symbol of order and commerce. For officials, it was a civic project to reflect the city's pride. This division reflected larger tensions in New York. The city was growing rapidly, but it struggled to balance heritage with progress, community with commerce. Bowling Green stood at the center of these struggles. In the 1850s, Bowling Green took on a new role that reflected the city's growing importance in national defense. The small oval at the foot of Broadway, once a colonial leisure ground and later a stage for immigrant gatherings, became a site for military parades and public displays of patriotism. During this period, New York was emerging as a vital port and commercial hub for the United States. Its harbor connected the nation to global trade, and its financial district financed much of the country's growth. With this prominence came responsibility. The city was expected to contribute to national defense, and public spaces such as Bowling Green became stages where military strength was displayed. Volunteer militias, which were common in the mid-19th century, often marched through Bowling Green. These units, made up of local citizens, drilled and paraded to demonstrate readiness. Their presence in the park reminded residents that New York was not only a center of commerce, but also a city prepared to defend the nation. The parades carried symbolic meaning. They showed unity in a city divided by immigration and class tensions. They reassured merchants and officials that order could be maintained, and they gave ordinary citizens a chance to witness military discipline in the heart of their city. For immigrants, the parades were both a spectacle and a reminder of their new country's expectations. Bowling Green's location made it ideal for such displays. Situated near the Battery and the financial district, it was visible to both newcomers arriving by ship and businessmen working nearby. Military parades passing through the park sent a clear message: New York was strong, organized, and central to the nation's defense. By the 1860s, the tension between heritage and progress reached its peak. The Civil War loomed, and New York was divided. Bowling Green became a place where citizens debated the war, protested conscription, and celebrated victories. The park carried layers of meaning: colonial origins, revolutionary scars, immigrant gatherings, and civic pride. Officials sought to control the park, keeping it orderly and beautified. Citizens used it for protest and celebration. The clash reflected the city's larger struggle to balance order with freedom. The late 19th century was marked by reform movements across America. Industrialization had transformed cities, but it also brought poverty, overcrowding, and disease. Reformers sought to reshape urban life, targeting housing, sanitation, and public spaces. Parks were seen as tools for moral improvement, places where citizens could escape the chaos of city streets. Bowling Green stood at the center of these debates. Reformers argued that it should be beautified and controlled. Citizens argued that it should remain open and accessible. William R. Grace, mayor of New York in the 1880s, supported civic improvement projects, including the maintenance of Bowling Green. Reform organizations, such as the Citizens Association, pushed for stricter control of public spaces, arguing that parks should reflect order and morality. Immigrant leaders, especially Irish and Italian community figures, resisted restrictions, insisting that parks belonged to the people. These figures embodied the tension of the era: reform versus freedom, order versus community. In the 1870s, city officials began beautifying Bowling Green. New plantings, benches, and pathways were added. The park was reshaped to reflect Victorian ideals of order and refinement. Yet these changes carried controversy. Some citizens argued that beautification erased the park's scars, removing reminders of revolution. Others insisted that progress demanded improvement. At the same time, officials imposed stricter rules. Public gatherings were restricted, and police monitored the park more closely. Reformers argued that this was necessary to maintain order. Citizens argued that it destroyed freedom. Bowling Green became a contested space, reflecting the city's struggle to balance control with liberty. This division reflected larger tensions in New York. The city was growing rapidly, but it struggled to balance heritage with progress, freedom with control. Bowling Green stood at the center of these struggles. By 1900, New York had become the largest city in the United States. The consolidation of the 5 boroughs in 1898 created a metropolis of millions. Skyscrapers rose in Lower Manhattan, subways were built, and civic projects reshaped the city. Bowling Green, the oldest park, stood amid this transformation. Its location near the financial district made it a symbol of civic pride. Yet its small size and colonial scars made it unique. Officials debated whether it should be modernized, preserved, or repurposed. Citizens debated whether it should remain a public gathering place or be reshaped to reflect order. Mayor George B. McClellan, Jr., who served as mayor of New York City from 1904 to 1909, was deeply invested in civic projects that reshaped the city's public spaces. The son of Civil War General George B. McClellan, he carried a strong sense of civic duty and believed that New York's parks should reflect the dignity of a modern metropolis. During his administration, improvements were made to several small parks, including Bowling Green. McClellan supported efforts to maintain and beautify the park, ensuring that it remained a symbol of civic pride in the heart of the financial district. His policies reflected a broader movement in the city to modernize and refine public spaces, making them orderly and attractive. At the same time, city planners influenced by the City Beautiful movement saw Bowling Green as a candidate for modernization. The City Beautiful movement, which gained momentum in the United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, argued that parks and public spaces should embody order, symmetry, and beauty. Advocates believed that well-designed spaces could uplift citizens morally and socially, encouraging discipline and civic pride. For them, Bowling Green's colonial scars, the iron fence with its missing crowns and its modest size, were reminders of disorder. They pushed for improvements such as new plantings, carefully laid pathways, and ornamental features to bring the park in line with modern ideals of beauty. Their vision was not only aesthetic, but also political. They wanted Bowling Green to reflect the authority and stability of the city itself. Yet, Immigrant communities, especially Italians and Eastern Europeans who had settled in Lower Manhattan, viewed Bowling Green differently. For them, the park was not a symbol of order imposed from above, but a gathering place where they could assert their presence in civic life. Italians used the park for cultural celebrations tied to their heritage, while Eastern European immigrants gathered there for meetings and discussions. In moments of protest, Bowling Green became a stage where immigrant voices challenged restrictions and demanded recognition. These communities resisted the idea that the park should be tightly controlled or beautified only for display. To them, Bowling Green was a living space, a place where ordinary people could gather, celebrate, and speak.